LaPierre. Really stoked to be back with you again today. We are streaming on all kinds of places today, so please write in your questions, comments, your experience,
really
strength, and
stoked
hope.
to be back with you again today.
Having a little technical difficulty here just for a moment.
So
bear with me.
Write in.
That's a little bit funky. I'm hearing myself talk back. So, okay, got rid of the echo. Technical difficulties are taken care of, and we are live. So we're live today, streaming on ChooseHelp.com, streaming on Sober Now's Facebook page. If you haven't been over there yet, please check it out. Give it a like. Helps the algorithms a lot. We're streaming on Sober Now's YouTube channel today, and if you haven't already been over there, please head over to YouTube and pull up Sober Now. You're going to have access to about 95 videos on different aspects of recovery, completely free. Click that like button and then click the subscribe button. And about once a week, you'll get an email letting you know that some new content has been added. Live stream sessions are announced there and can be viewed there. And of course, we want you to check out our website, which is sobernow.com. Currently offering a lifetime pass for a lot of exclusive content and access to our 28-day home study program. Two programs, actually. One for those who are seeking addiction recovery or support for their ongoing recovery, and a separate program for folks who are affected others, folks who have a loved one in active addiction or maybe early recovery, and how to navigate those waters. 100% confidential, to the point that it absolutely ensures complete anonymity. Don't even need to know your name to have you sign up for the program, and would love to have you check out the benefits of those programs. So today we are talking about, is it ADD, anxiety, or addiction? And very much, again, want to see your comments and questions. Would love to make this more interactive. My experience is that the three of those things look an awful lot alike. I know that at different points in our recovery process, we struggle to understand ourselves. We say that we're trying to figure things out, and we typically complicate them an awful lot. We typically pathologize ourselves. We tend to assume that there's something fundamentally wrong with us other than a substance use disorder. And one of the biggest challenges when it comes to mental health is first of all, I don't want to diagnose anybody as having a mental illness until they've got stability and safety in their lives and they're on a solid pathway to recovery. One of my biggest concerns and experiences over the years is meeting with folks who were diagnosed with mental health conditions while they were still in active addiction. It's really important. I can't stress this enough. Active addiction looks like a whole lot of different mental illnesses. Early recovery can look like a lot of different mental illnesses, and if you meet with a doctor or a clinician who really doesn't understand substance use disorder, it's amazing how many bad things can happen. It's truly staggering. One of the most common examples that I've gotten over the years is talking with folks who had alcohol dependency, abused cocaine, and if you're doing those two things, you look a lot like somebody who has bipolar disorder and isn't medicated. Now, that obviously doesn't mean that you're mentally ill. It means that, hey, you're drinking a lot and you're putting a lot of money up your nose, and that looks like a crazy person. But it's not. And so I get concerned about folks because there's a self-fulfilling prophecy to mental health diagnoses. What often happens is a person gets diagnosed with something like bipolar disorder. They're placed on mood stabilizing medication. Certainly they had maybe a little bit of depression on board, and a mood stabilizer is going to help that depression a little bit. And so the next thing you know, a person was diagnosed with this, given medication for this, they felt a little bit better, and so of course they're going to reasonably assume that that's what's wrong. And in a very high percentage of cases, it's not. According to the DSM, which is the reference guide that we use for anything relating to mental illness, maybe one person out of every 200 lives with bipolar disorder, maybe. And disproportionately, those are over 80% of those people are men. It drives me crazy to watch advertisements for Women who are usually perimenopausal age, who suddenly, out of the blue, have developed bipolar disorder, or bipolar depression is usually how they refer to it. And this is absolute crap. It's very often the case. First of all, nobody develops a mental illness like bipolar disorder later in life. If you're going to have it, you're going to have it by your early 20s at the latest. Secondly, maybe the problem is I'm drinking a little too much these days and I'm having some mood swings that go along with it. Maybe the problem is something that it has nothing whatsoever to do with mental health. But those are just some cautions that I throw out there, because we're often misdiagnosed. If you walk into a 12-step meeting and ask how many of you have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, probably somewhere around 80 or 90%, which is just completely insane. So the bottom line is, active addiction looks a lot like mental illness, early recovery looks a lot like mental illness, and if you find yourself really struggling with depression or anxiety in early recovery, please know that that's normal. That's healthy, it's reasonable. If you're looking at the wreckage of your life and you're feeling really down and really scared, you should be. That's understandable. Your life's a mess and you're looking to rebuild it. So please don't go off the deep end assuming that there must be other things that are going on. What we need is a whole lot of stability, security, basic life fulfillment. We need a whole lot of support and a really effective support system. And in the first year of recovery especially, we need to keep things really simple. Everything else is just muddying the waters and trying to figure things out, which is, what we most often do inside of our heads at the worst possible times. And it most often leads to isolation at a time where we really need support and really need folks telling us that we're okay, reassuring us, and focusing on pursuing our pathway to recovery, whatever that is. Whether it's harm reduction, medicated assisted treatment, or sobriety, we want to be able to support you on all of those pathways. One of the things, when we start looking at mental health, excuse me, one of the first things that I point out to folks is that there's an enormous overlap in symptoms. So even when you're at a stage where you have a lot of stability and security and you've decided that it's time to look at your mental health, there's a lot to consider here because the symptoms of different mental health conditions overlap. So the example I usually use is, if you see me cough and sneeze, well, do I have a cold? Do I have the flu? Do I have bronchitis? Do I have a pneumonia or an upper respiratory infection? We don't know. There's not enough information. Those symptoms apply to all of those different conditions, and having a little bit of information doesn't really tell us the whole story. But we're the kind of people who will drive ourselves crazy, right? If we're experiencing a physical ailment, we'll get on WebMD, and the next thing you know, we've convinced ourselves that we have a brain tumor. If we're struggling with mental health, we'll do the same kind of thing, and we'll come up with the worst possible prognosis, the worst possible condition. We attach labels to ourselves, assuming the worst, and really not even recognizing that that is not helpful to anybody ever. Trust me, we checked. So if we look at something like attention deficit disorder, the first thing that you have to notice is, of course, a person who's really ADD is easily distracted. They have a brain that goes at about 100 miles an hour. They may struggle to stay on task. And I can describe that a little further, but what I'm really describing is what it's like to be in early recovery. A person who has an addictive brain is used to their thoughts circling at about 100 miles an hour. We're used to being stressed and super worried. We're accustomed to intrusive thoughts. Sometimes we can drive ourselves crazy just because we're afraid we're going to forget something important. So thoughts that tend to be cyclical and all over the place, we fight this losing battle to straighten them all out inside of our heads. And so my first suggestion is put that shit down on paper. Like, really, get it out into the open, because it's going to be a lot easier to organize and 1,000,000 times more amenable to change. Anxiety and ADD look an awful lot alike. A person who's anxious, of course, is very worried and nervous, but they're easily distracted, their thoughts are cyclical, they might be experiencing a lot of intrusive thoughts. And again, in the context of recovery, sometimes we're stressed, more often we're powerless, quite often we're looking for answers that don't exist. And so we need to slow down, and we need to have people in our lives that we trust enough to get reality checks from, get reassurance from, and just kind of tell them, look, I'm going to pour out everything that's going on in my head. Help me separate what's real and what isn't. There's a million things that as a therapist I'd love to have $1 for every time somebody told me. And one of them is people who tell me they're OCD. I'm pretty sure we can throw the whole alphabet soup of diagnoses at ourselves, and unfortunately professionals often do. My good friend Artis, who I quote quite often, went to a conference one time where there was a panel of psychiatrists who were talking about different ideas around dual diagnosis treatment. And dual diagnosis treatment, of course, is when we're treating a substance use disorder and mental health conditions at the same time. And she lost patience with this panel of quote-unquote experts and said, look, you can throw the whole DSM at us because depending upon where we're at in recovery, we're oppositional defiant as hell, we're scared as hell, we struggle, we get down. But while you're counting beans, referring to the medical industry and the profits that it makes, she said, we're counting bodies. So we need to focus on helping folks get sober, stay sober, have basic life need fulfillment, and a lot of stability. And then, further down the road, we'll go looking for what else is going on here. And to cut to the chase, honestly, the number one factor that is undermining our mental health is trauma. A lot of us don't necessarily meet criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD is in a family of anxiety disorders. And so for a lot of us, the root of our struggle is trauma. And so we say that we're OCD. Why? Because we're clean freaks, because we're germaphobes, because we're people that crave excessive amounts of order, excessive amounts of cleanliness sometimes. And these are, unfortunately, the experiences most often not of somebody who truly has obsessions and compulsions, but rather someone who has survived sexual abuse or sexual assault. Having an intense desire for control is part and parcel to recovery. If you didn't experience trauma before addiction, the places that addiction will take you absolutely will subject you to it. And so for people like you and I, control is what we feel we need in order to have a sense of safety, a sense of things are okay. But we're control freaks. We don't just want what we want. We want it where we want it, when we want it, how we want it, and we'll take just about anything to an extreme. So, there's no real need for us to figure anything out in the first year. What we need to do instead is keep things really simple. I love the Keep It Simple system. I love looking at in the simplest possible terms, what do I need? What's the next right thing for me to do? Who do I need to lean on? And again, stay off WebMD. Stay out of trying to figure anything out. Conversely, if you are looking for a good resource on understanding mental health, surprisingly, Wikipedia is actually excellent for it. They have done a really nice job of taking clinical ideas and putting them into layperson-friendly definitions and kind of helping you to understand where that's at. So I'm going to pause just for a moment here. I'd love to get some questions. What is it that you want to know about? All right. Folks are shy today. Come on, give me your experience, strength, and hope. I'd love to answer your questions about anything pertaining to recovery, whether that's a substance use disorder, trauma, or other aspects of mental health. I think one of the biggest downfalls for us as we go through these processes is that we fall into the pitfall of being a quote-unquote good alcoholic, We are a little bit self-centered, or a lot of bit self-centered in our views, and when we feel like things in our life are not going the way that they should be, or at the pace that they should be, because of course we're always in a hurry. Might have taken us 30 years to get here, but we'd like to be all better by Tuesday. We tend to get this terminally unique kind of perspective. We somehow forget that other people are struggling, other people have mental illness, other people have substance use disorder, and too often, this is my biggest fear for folks when they tell me they're going to be figuring things out, is that they're isolating and overthinking instead of learning from other people who have had that experience. On some level, we all tend to reinvent the wheel and go looking for solutions instead of learning from people who are very much like us, what's worked for them, what helped them to turn their lives around, and how did they do things a little bit just incrementally, just slowly, just manageably. Again, we don't do this stuff in a hurry. This is an ongoing process, and it's the most important part of what it means to be a work in progress. Okay. I think it's important to consider, too, that your disease will use anything and everything that it can get its hands on. I've always loved the expression that my disease wants me dead, but it will settle for miserable. So your disease will absolutely you throw fuel on your anxiety. It will tell you that you absolutely should be depressed and that there's really no point in even trying. Your disease will use past trauma. It will use shame and guilt. It will use anything and everything that it can to keep you alone inside your head, and your disease hates it when you're connecting with other people. It hates it when you're growing spiritually or working steps. Your disease loses power when you start exposing that inner critic, when you start sharing those old tapes, when you start talking about just naming what it is that you live with. Approaching things with vulnerability takes away a lot of the power of your disease. Fear is probably the greatest example. What I say to folks routinely is that how we deal with fear, I'm convinced, determines the lion's share of what's possible in our lives. And so when I'm afraid, the first thing I want to do is share that with the people who really care about me and support me. And it's beautiful because I get to receive lots of encouragement and reassurance, but more importantly, I get a ton of accountability, which is really important, because in the absence of that, my addictive brain is going to generate about 10,000 reasons why I should not face this fear, why I should not do the next right thing. And so by sharing this with others, it increases my follow-through about 10,000%. And I urge folks to consider that at some point, yes, feelings are very important, but actions are vital, right? We don't think our way into a new way of living. We live our way into a new way of thinking. And we do the next right thing, and we lean on each other for support. Because frankly, everything else is trying to put a square peg into a round hole. And I've been guilty myself of this, is that if you push hard enough, maybe the square peg goes into the round hole. I've met a lot of folks over the years who tell me that they're complicated or that their lives are very complicated. I've never once found that to be true. I've met people that have a whole lot of stuff going on. I've met people who have a lot of different interests and a lot of things going on in their life. And so what feels like complexity is usually just too many moving pieces. We have a tendency to avoid and ignore our fears. We have a tendency to avoid and ignore anything that feels bad to us. We potentially become addicted to anything that feels good to us. That type of mindset is not dissimilar from where we were in active addiction. In active addiction, we learned how to hustle, we learned how to problem solve, we were incredibly motivated, we were avoiding withdrawals, and we did whatever we felt needed to be done to get what we wanted. And so that lifestyle of going 100 miles an hour, that lifestyle of self-deception and distracting ourselves from ourselves, it doesn't go away just because we stopped using. It doesn't go away because we got some stability in our lives. It's absolutely vital that we expose our fears. It's absolutely vital that we acknowledge some of the really simple and common sense approaches to this. So, for example, when I work with folks who are struggling with anxiety, I'll often ask them, if you weren't feeling anxious right now, what would you be feeling? My experience is that the biggest cause of anxiety is when we don't allow ourselves to feel and express what we really feel. For a lot of us, feeling and expressing anger just doesn't feel safe. We associate anger with past abuse. We associate anger with violence. And so we we stuff those negative emotions. And there's two levels to that. The first one is feeling, and the second one is expressing. If I don't let myself share what my struggles are, what's stressing me out, that's really self-limiting. If I don't allow myself to feel it internally, that's debilitating. Stuffing those emotions long-term is what leads to chronic anxiety conditions, but it affects our holistic health. Anxiety tends to ruin a person's gastrointestinal system. It tends to result in chronic neck and shoulder pain. It has a negative effect on our immune system, and it's associated with a lot of autoimmune diseases, particularly when the cause of anxiety is trauma. Depression works in a very similar way. Stephen Wright, he was a stand-up comedian, he said that depression is anger without enthusiasm. So if you keep stuffing that anger, that's a big part of what depression is. If you keep stuffing pain and carrying it around with you, it's what we call baggage, right? You get to decide how much baggage you're going to carry, and then ideally, through the course of your recovery, you stop being your own worst enemy. You start resolving inner conflicts with yourself, and you allow yourself to grieve. Grieving is probably one of the healthiest things that we can do in the course of recovery, but it's never something that we welcome, right? The simple truth is it hurts to let go of pain, and anybody who tells you otherwise is trying to sell you some shit. I don't know how to let go of anger in a way that doesn't involve being angry. And so I get that these are uncomfortable, but I often remind folks of the adage that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Suffering is when I experience pain alone, and I recycle it. I don't really let go of anything. It's one of my all-time favorite Facebook memes. Everything I let go of has claw marks on it. So grieving is allowing myself to share pain with good people. And an addicted brain will say, no, that's an imposition, that's a burden, you shouldn't be doing that, they already have too much on their plate, which are really beautiful sounding lies. I don't have the right to decide for somebody else what's a burden or an imposition. I have to allow them to make that decision. I have to let them set their own boundaries. I have to really keep at the forefront of my thoughts that it helps them to help me. And that's one of the most counterintuitive aspects of recovery, but I think it's a vital piece to hold on to. Randall, thank you for your comment and thank you for your subscription. I really appreciate that. Good to have you with us today. I'm really excited to watch the growth of Sober Now and the different Facebook feeds and the different video compilations that we've put together, and I hope that you'll like and share those, because I always want to expand these conversations and tailor it to exactly what it is that you need. I've been working on Sober Now for about 5 years now. This is a labor of love, and it's actually a product of my experience professionally. By day, I'm a dual diagnosis therapist, so I work with mental health and with substance use disorder. And for almost my entire career, I've been meeting with folks late at night, off books, doing what I can to accommodate, especially for professionals who are afraid of potentially losing their job, for folks who are afraid of losing their family or their standing in a community because to admit to a substance use disorder or to admit to something like depression or PTSD potentially endangers their career. I understand that. That's true for me as well. And so creating Sober Now was kind of a lifetime goal of let's create some resources that are completely safe to use. Let's develop some resources that don't involve getting a diagnosis or don't involve the potential for having your confidentiality broken. So those are some things that I think are really important as we continue through battling substance use disorder, making recovery more visible. What's really important to me is that we take excellent care of ourselves, particularly in this time. We are fighting multiple epidemics in the middle of a pandemic. I think we have a strong level of awareness that opioid addiction is epidemic in our country. What we've lost sight of is the fact that alcoholism has been at epidemic levels in the U.S. for well over 100 years now. It's just become something that's accepted and somehow normative. I love helping people break free from the places that addiction takes us. And I love helping folks overcome trauma because I know that for way too many of us, the shame and the guilt that we carry is the biggest barrier to the lives that we most want. Anxiety is rough, attention deficit disorder is rough, but addiction kills people every day. And so what we've seen in the past 6 months from the pandemic is a huge rise in overdose deaths, a huge rise in the rate of relapse, and it's more difficult than it's ever been to get into services for mental health or for substance use disorder. The waiting lists across the country are enormous. And so here again is a place where Sober Now can actually be really supportive and helpful, educational towards your recovery process. And I would love to hear from you personally. If you don't have people in your life that are safe to connect with and reach out to, if you have questions about substance use disorder or trauma or mental health, please use me as a resource. Jim@sobernow.com is the easiest way to reach me. Would love to hear topics that you'd like to have covered in future live streams. Always wide open to that. Would love to hear what's working for you. What solutions have you found? What pathway has worked best for you? Totally want to support those. So, gonna be winding down for today. I really appreciate you joining me. I look forward to talking to you next week. I'm here noontime Thursday just about every week, talking about different aspects of addiction recovery and trauma recovery, and urging you to take excellent care of yourselves. Self-care is more important than it's ever been. Your recovery is more important than it's ever been. And you absolutely, as we all do, deserve a life second to none. So again, please connect with me. Please take excellent care of yourselves. Please put a like on this video and share with friends and family so that we can reach more folks and see who we can be of service to. I appreciate it very much. And finally, just head over to YouTube. Sober Now is what you enter in. Hit that subscribe button, and every week you're going to get a live stream, and you're going to get some vlogs of different aspects of recovery, and every single one of those is an opportunity to enrich your life. And I thank you. Have a great day.